Greetings, friends.
My name is Steve Kelsey.
And I'm Ron Leota, and this is The Roles We Play, the show about the roles we play in the games we love. On the show today, we're going to be talking about D&D and you and me, our life with Dungeons & Dragons. Without further ado, let's start the show.
You know, I did that hand symbol for D&D to kind of mimic their logo, and then I realized on the video...
That's the part that, like,
I
isn't on
just
video.
have the
This is over the intro, the writer. Yeah. So yeah, like you heard in the intro, we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Before we proceed, this is going to be a very positive show about D&D because we're big nerds, played games for a really long time. I don't think it's fair to proceed without first acknowledging that D&D throughout the years has had many problems with sexism, racism, and themes that aren't exactly awesome. They're doing a lot to improve it these days, and that's really cool, and also one of the very positive things about new D&D that I'm enjoying. But yeah, I didn't want to like just jump in and be like, oh, D&D is the best with no problems. I admit the things you love sometimes have bad parts.
Yes, and absolutely, and but this is more about our personal experience, the things that we like about it, how we got into it, and then also in my case being being me, looking like this, white male, beardy, straight guy, very loud, appropriately overweight. Like I didn't run into a lot of the conflict with this. I don't know Ron's experience, but they haven't expressed to me. You haven't ever expressed to me like, oh yeah, I remember when I jumped into this D&D game and they just started just like being like, fuck you, Ron.
The worst I ever got in tabletop was casual racism. Not even like overt, but just kind of like, well, I've never played D&D with a guy who had brown skin before. That's a fucking odd thing to point out, bruh. I used to be a lot darker when I was younger too, because I worked outside and you know, saw the sun.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was mostly casual stuff like that, or like, oh yeah, it's so cool to have a Mexican guy playing with us, and I'm like, I'm not Mexican, and like second off, like, what?
Anyway,
what a weird thing to point out.
So moving past that, let's get into the fun stuff. Let's get into the fun stuff of D&D.
So let me ask you, what edition of D&D did you start?
Okay, so my first D&D was actually 3.5. I didn't start playing D&D until I was like 25, 26.
Okay.
And to be clear, I'm 38 now. Maybe I was 24 as early as that, but that was the first time I ever tried to create a character, ever like made anything. And the reason for that is just I didn't have any friends that were super into it. Now, it would have been... I don't know what edition was popular in 1994, 95.
Second edition.
It would have been second. But I wasn't allowed to play Dungeons & Dragons because my mother watched 60 Minutes. And there was a thing in the late 80s and early 90s called Satanic Panic.
Yep.
And, you know, D&D just did not help it with its artwork. But
there is a hilarious Tom Hanks movie all about it.
Yep. And so that was my problem. So a buddy of mine, my only friend really growing up, we came up with a thing called Wizards, which is really funny now to think about.
Yeah.
Like it had wizards in the name. It was like Wizards and something, or just Wizards, where we knew how kind of D&D sort of worked. And so we draw character pictures and like talk about things and talk about what the systems would be. But we never really played because there were only two of us, and we didn't have any kind of like guidance on rules. So it was 3.5. MC3PO from Death Star was the one who invited me to play. Jess is his name, is his government name. He invited me to play. He had this campaign kind of picked out and everything, and I lived with a couple other people. One of them wanted to play, and then some of his friends he played games with wanted to play, and I was interested to do it. And then that campaign very quickly didn't work out. And I can't remember. I think technically, this is why I will, because I played Advanced D&D now as an adult. later.
Oh, man, you went back.
Yeah, I went all the way back, and I don't recommend it. It's terrible, and it shouldn't have ever become popular. It's bad game mechanics. No one can convince me that this game deserved the success that it got. I'm glad it's successful. It's a big part of my life now. But it did not earn that. That was desperation and boredom that was making that game happen. That game is lucky the internet didn't exist in the 70s, or it would have never gone anywhere. But
Gary who?
What is it? What did he work for IBM or something? Game name like Gygax? Come on. Yeah, I've since done that. And I will make the argument that though each serving plate of D&D tastes different, the mechanics functionality of it didn't really appeal to me nearly as much until 5th edition. And that part of that is coming into 3.5, because 3.5 is when the rails were all the way off of 3rd edition, and there was infinity supplements. And they weren't balancing at all anymore. It was about publishing books and getting people to buy them. And that's fine. But it means that you could make broken characters in both directions, like complete fails and stuff. And so I wasn't nearly as interested. But I want to say, 3.5 was the first time I actually rolled up a character, got to role play with them. It was a paladin. I play pretty much exclusively paladins and bards for some reason. Maybe because I was raised Catholic and I'm a talker. But yeah. So that was it. So yeah, only about 12 to 13 years of playing tabletop for me. What about you? When was your very first?
So it's important to note my first game was game I really got into was World of Darkness, like Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
That was my intro. So I was used to rules light games with just rolling D10s. How many dots you got? Add them together, roll the D10s. If they're 6s or above, you win. And that's what role-playing was to me.
Yeah.
So my friends really loved D&D 2nd edition and tried to get me into it. I played one game of D&D 2nd edition and was like, fuck this. I'm going back to World of Darkness. I'm like, calculate my wacko? No, dude, THACO. I don't care. That sounds dumb.
2-hit armor class 0, bro. It's such an obvious acronym.
And it's it was one of those things where
you have to do a math calculation on attacking every different thing every time.
And I will admit, the lore intrigued me and the mechanics completely turned me off.
As they should have.
But so I had a different experience. So then I'd say the year 2000, my friends were like, hey, this D&D 3rd edition thing is super cool.
Yeah.
The
3.0
thing,
even is
the thing cool. we go to, RPGA, which it was like official Wizards of the Coast club that you could go to and have a character on books you could bring anywhere and play.
Yeah.
They were like, you really should try this. It's a great way to meet new people and play with more nerds, and we'd love to have you along. And I go, well, I'll check out this 3rd edition. So 3rd edition to me was a breath of fresh air.
Compared to 2nd, it's a gift.
It's like, so I can understand if 3.5 or 3 was your first experience, how it would be like, wow, that's overwhelming.
Also, 3rd edition at the beginning, I have no problem with. Mm-hmm. Like when you go and you track 3rd edition as it sort of journeys on, at the beginning, I'm like, this is fine. It's a little crunchy for a new player to role-playing. But overall, because there wasn't so many different intersecting sources of information on it, it was like, this is manageable.
And then they started making the and books, like the Sword and Fist, and all that stuff that expanded it.
For a crunchier role player is heaven. And I don't think that now, in my experience, that would turn me off of a game. Especially because you can steal so many books on the internet. Not that I steal modern D&D. I have a D&D Beyond account and I spend a ton of money on it. But in those days when I was younger, right, much theft, much pit torrenting to be had.
You're outside of the statute of limitations. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, it's fine. I used to steal from you, Wizards of the Coast, all the fucking time.
But it's cool. Hasbro had bought you at that point, and you would be okay. Yes. Magic was doing.
Magic was making it happen.
But it was really cool. My very first real game of sit down D&D that wasn't just trying out 2 was in Wizards of the Coast's Renton campus, their original HQ's cafeteria.
Yeah. Great place.
And like, what a cool place to be. Like, I'm 18 years old. It's my first game ever. I'm 38 as well, so you guys can do the math. I've been playing D&D for 20 years. I really loved 3, 5. I felt personally was there was a lot of balance improvements, and then they fucked it up by making the complete books and having the most broken prestige classes you could possibly imagine. But for me, D&D was my let's break the game, which we enjoyed doing at the time, and then World of Darkness fulfilled that let's be role players game.
Yeah, which is fair and totally accurate. Honestly, I would argue until 5th edition, that is how almost anyone should have been approaching D&D. Like break it, figure out optimal strategies, get weird with it. But if you want systems for role playing, there are much better systems out there that like allow that, and their systems don't get in the way of it, which D&D system absolutely did, because its game was all the battle mechanics and maxing, and I didn't even care about the dice, right? Like by the time you're in those broken prestige casts, it's just like, well, my additional damage is so much more than my dice will ever roll, so I'm looking to crit on that.
Oh yeah, and so my favorite campaign for D&D was a 3.5 campaign where me and a group of buddies all decided we were going to make the nightmare characters for a DM, and to make it fair, every week we would trade off who DM'd. And how we do that is we ran it module based.
Yeah.
So the person who was running, their character would stand arms akimbo until the actual fight began, and then somebody else would roll for their character, and that person could not get treasure from the game they ran, to avoid the whole like, weird, my character uses a greatsword and you just so happen to find a +5 greatsword of God smiting.
Yeah.
And that one, we started at 12th level, and the goal was, within the rules of the complete books, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Player's Handbook, destroy this game.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a lot of fun, because we all went in with the same mindset and mentality.
You knew what you were doing at that point.
Oh, yeah, and I think I ended up playing a Frenzied Berserker whose average damage on his 5 attacks per round was like 180 damage.
Jesus God.
And like, it was one of those games though that like, yes, that is a nightmare to be the sole DM of that game. And there are many.
Rotating makes it easier and more fun, because then you get to participate in the nonsense. Like, no, I love that idea. I love a rotating DM campaign. I will always support it. If you can ever figure out how to do it in your group, it means that no one has to be the DM the entire time. There are people that like being DMs, and that's all they want to do, and that's cool. But almost every DM I've ever met loves being a player sometimes, would love to be a player sometimes. And so a rotating DM, whether you do it module-based like that, where they have a character, or whether you just basically make your campaign very episodic, or you know, there's lots of ways you can do it. So I've had a non-D&D related experience where I had a Serenity campaign where it was rotating DMs.
Nice.
Which made sense, because Firefly was a television series that had various plot threads it was setting up in the first season. So each DM just took a plot thread that Firefly had introduced as a series, and then that was theirs. So if it was about crime, I was in charge of the crime plot. So I had a kind of a arc of crime, but that meant that if I was DMing, my character would basically stay on the ship or be kidnapped.
You write what you know, and as you admitted earlier, crime,
right? Crime. I know how to steal D&D books in 2004.
Yo, I know what a BitTorrent is.
Yeah. I'm familiar with LimeWire. God, we're old. Now people just go to Google to steal stuff.
Right? Now there's just wikis with all the information on there, and they just don't care anymore, because they did finally realize that, no, we're doing good. We're doing okay.
They figured it out. Anyway, so
let me ask you this. So I shared mine. What was your favorite D&D campaign you played in?
So my favorite campaign that I've played in. This is tough for me. You know what? Yeah, I'll say that my favorite. Okay, this is not my favorite character I've played, but it's my favorite campaign I've played in, which is two different things. The favorite campaign I've played in is run by a friend of mine, and yours, a gentleman by the name of Aaron Blaylock. He ran a historical. It was in 4th ed, I want to say, because that was the edition of D&D of the time. Yeah, it was, because I was a psionic with a bunch of bard, unsurprisingly. It was a historical fantasy world. And so it was set in Europe, but there's magic, right? Essentially around, I want to say 14 to 1500s, somewhere in that time. And so, yeah, it had to be closer to late 1500s, early 1600s. Yeah, no, it was there because the New World was a thing. But no, we were in Europe, right? It was still about Europe. And I got to play a 4th son of an Italian merchant family that was being promised to the Catholic Church to pursue the dark arts and everything like that. Not him pursue it as an interest, but to shut it down, right? So that was his thing. But he didn't want that. He wanted to be a merchant. He's in his 30s when he finally gets weaseled into being forced into this and everything. So I come in as a character named Sebastian Castio, which was just a silly name that I thought I'd give him, and then he quickly became Sebastian Spaghettio. And his character voice eventually devolved into Mario bouncy Italian Family Guy joke Italian voice. What are you doing? But nonetheless, it was a very silly campaign with a very serious story attached to it. But the reason it was my favorite is because Aaron, as a DM, was big into letting the players do what they want based off their characters. And then punishing them later for those choices. So we're sent by the Pope to deal with this kind of growing undead problem that's happening, right? And he's using real things. Aaron can speak German, so we're traveling through Germany to try and get to somewhere north of Germany, and so so he's got this thing, and he's got some good historical hooks and everything, and we're going through real places of the time. And we get to this big town, and I can't remember the name of the town, and we'd already dealt with some big zombie problems, and we'd saved a bunch of smaller communities. So we get to this big town, and my character, being an egoist, or an egotist, is goes to the head of the military arm of the town, is you need to do this, zombies are coming, everything like that. And he as a bard, right, as a psionic bard, so he doesn't even have any rank or anything, and he's Italian, and he's you need to do this, and the guy's no, you're not in charge of us. And I'm fine then, we're gonna bounce. And then Aaron, as the DM, allowed our character party to leave a large city that had a carnival with a talking dragon coming to it, and other various things that were clearly plot hooks that were supposed to be the next several sessions. And we left that town, and we were obviously also supposed to help save it from zombies, destroying it. We left that town, and he destroyed the entire town, that entire city, that maybe 100,000 people completely converted to zombies because of that. Later we were punished for that. We met that dragon, but he let a lot of really big things happen, and then would later punish us by hurting our characters, taking shit away that was valuable to us and stuff like that, and then moving his plot pieces. And I loved it because it meant anything could happen in that campaign, and that everything we did had some sort of consequence. Also, Aaron is one of the worst rollers I've ever role played with, so when he's your DM, it's fan-fucking-tastic, because he is terrible at it.
Oh man! So one of my
tell me yours.
My favorite D&D story kind of comes down to, it was that weird OP campaign, right?
Yeah,
that we were talking about. I'm playing the frenzied berserker of the party, and it was one of those everybody stand up and cheer moments around a table that you so rarely get. So we go into a fight with a Dracolich, and that's a undead bone dragon guy. And so we work out a strategy that, okay, so here's the deal. That thing is going to be a nightmare to fight. It has ridiculous hit points, but we can rely on a really odd strategy. What we're going to do is, I'll just tell it how the DM experience did. So the cleric, we forfeit our turns till the cleric goes first, and the cleric returns to life the Dracolich, and the GM's like, okay, he's still an elder black dragon, and I'm like, we know, that's cool. And then he's like, all right, that's fine. And I go, all right, I go into a rage and a frenzy, and I do a full round attack on him. And he's like, oh, okay. It's like, cool, that's fine, sure.
It's normal.
Here's a bunch of, you just did like 600 points of damage. That's crazy. And I go, and can you go ahead, since that was 5 attacks, please make me 5 massive damage death rolls? And he was like, wait. And I go, he's a gargantuan creature, right? Yeah. And I go, so if you do 100 points of damage or more to a gargantuan creature, they have to save for massive damage death. Right, but he has a plus 25 to his save. Doesn't matter. If he rolls a 1, he dies.
Yeah. So.
And he's like, you bastards.
Yep, you mechanicked it out. And there's a 1 in 20 chance, which means every turn that you attacked, or which meant if you had 5 attacks with 100 plus damage, that's like a 25% chance.
And here's the great part.
Of rolling that 1.
First attack, rolls, crit failure. He goes, you fucking kill him. And the whole table just like, Aah! Like it's that scene from the movie The Gamers where the dude just whips his shirt off and spins it around over his head and they're dancing. We were doing stuff. We were just so excited.
There is so little more satisfying. And I like this. I like getting whomped as a DM. There's so little more satisfying than a DM who's clearly set up something difficult and something challenging and just mechanically using the game or using the methodology to just hose that moment, just take all of the weight out of it quickly and effectively so it wasn't even a threat to your party. Like it wasn't this, like there's something very satisfying about a hard-won battle too as a player.
Oh, sure.
But like the moments that feel the best is when you've outsmarted your DM, you've done something very effective, it's within the rules of the game. It's not like my story where it's like the DM would have to allow that. Most DMs would kind of keep corralling our characters within the city. But like in this case, it was like, you gave us this enemy. This was supposed to be hard. You didn't think about this. This is the obvious choice, and it's within the mechanics as written. There's no interpretation.
Yeah. And this is the great part. So the DM's pissed. I mean, he's not like, I'm gonna rage quit pissed, but he's like, dude, this was supposed to be the last. And kind of goes, all right, fine. The dragon falls over on top of you. And I go, okay, cool. That's fine. I said, so how much does the dragon weigh? And he gave me some number. And I go, even with the 35 or 40 strength I was at that point, I can't lift this, right? And he goes, of course you can't lift it. And I go, cool. So I continue to frenzy and flail around and don't kill my party. Frenzied Berserkers have the drawback of they have to continue fighting until their frenzy ends. They'll start by attacking enemies, then NPCs, then fellow party members, then inanimate objects in that order. Yeah. Only thing left in the room was my party members, and there was a time where I almost party wiped because they couldn't drop me quick enough. Yeah. And after that, everyone got a wand of Tasha's hideous laughter. Yeah. To stop me.
Like laugh.
Yeah. So he's frustrated, has the dragon fall over on me, and I'm like, so I can't kill the party now? And he's like, fuck you, Ron. Seriously.
Seriously, but that would have been my response as your DM. I hope it will be. I hope that when we get that campaign going, I get to say, "Fuck you, Ron." I'll leave that little breadcrumb there in this video.
Okay, we won't talk about it.
We'll talk about it at the end. But I'll plug it at the end since this is D&D related.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you then.
Sure.
So that was your favorite campaign moment, like a great moment, one of the great moments. Do you have a character that you really loved, that you felt like was some of your best work, tabletop wise? It doesn't have to be D&D, especially if you spent a lot of your time investing in World of Darkness, because 3 and 3.5 weren't quite as roleplay friendly.
Yeah, so I think like my favorite characters, honestly, was probably one of my more recent PCs I played. Yeah. I got to play in a game where we did a Old West New World of Darkness. I guess they call it Chronicles of Darkness now because they're bringing back Old World of Darkness, and they don't want to say old new. Anyways, Chronicles of Darkness game. It was Old West. We were all playing different types of supernatural creatures hunting a demon lord. And I got the distinct honor to play the Promethean, which is a Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
And he was a very simple, very sweet person who wanted to do enough good in the world to become a real boy. All he ever wanted was to be a real person. Yeah. Which is the end goal from Prometheans, is to return to life, basically. Yeah. And I got to play this very sweet character who was strong enough to basically throw a stagecoach at you. But I wanted him to be a one-trick pony with a lot of role-playing depth, so he could role-play those failures of like, well, this is a very finesse-based thing, and I have nothing to add, and so how am I being helpful to my friends who like me when everybody else treats me bad? And it was a really fun character to play. My favorite D&D character to play, though, was probably my first at RPGA. I played a dwarven fighter named Oaken Baldirk, of course.
Of course.
And it was during the point where they were just starting to allow prestige classes into RPGA. So I thought, I'm not going to make the most efficient character. I'm just going to make a character that can always fight. So I took weird classes. One of them I took was Ghost Walker, which allowed you to go incorporeal for a small amount of time, which was one of the biggest weaknesses of fighters. So my favorite moment with that, we were playing a campaign I'll never forget the name of. It was called Silent Night. Yeah. And we were running it, and we found out the big twist was a mass silence spell had been cast over the entire town. So all the casters were relatively hosed. So what we ended up doing was I was the sole fighter in my group at the table. We all walked out of town. Everybody cast extended battle magic buffs on my character, did whatever prep they could, and then we went into town to do the thing. And the thing we had to fight was a ghost beholder. So of all things for me to get to fight was the most buffed version of my character basically having to solo the fight and being the motherfucker that could go incorporeal.
Yeah.
And it was
That's
just
satisfying.
It was just everything I had done for that character to make such a weird build was completely validated in that moment.
Yeah, and you're like, this is excellent.
And he was a lot of fun to play. And fun story, that was the character I was playing when I met Robin Williams.
Oh, very cool.
He came into the store we were playing at, I think it was Card House Games back in the day. And apparently the guy who ran the store had made and developed a trading card game that Robin and his kids were into.
Oh, neat.
So he came to the store to get the autograph of the creator for his kids' cards and just buy a bunch of shit at the store.
That's fucking adorable.
And so the guy, I remember the store owner just being like, I guess I will give you an autograph, Robin Williams.
Yeah, I don't know why you want mine, but sure.
And he took some pictures in the store with the guy and signed him on a Polaroid and hung him up on the wall. Yes, it was Polaroid era. Yeah. Walked around just kind of looking at D&D tables. Everybody was being pretty cool about him being there and not rushing him. Yeah. I stood up and was like, I really love your movies. Thank you for being you. Like shook his hand and said something awkward and then sat down and tried to role play in front of Robin Williams.
You can't. I wouldn't be able to.
And he bought something like $1,000 worth of Magic, some of the cards the guy did, and then I think Warhammer stuff. Yeah. And then just like walked out to do his left to do his live show. His handler wasn't there with him or anything. He just kind of showed up to a game store. And if it weren't for my D&D habit, I never would have met Robin Williams.
Yeah, and that's a gift. I don't have any celebrities I met because of D&D. I can say that confidently. But yeah,
no popular nerdcore people you met through D&D?
Not through D&D, no.
Just doing nerdcore.
Yeah, nerdcore. Yeah, all my performative stuff is how I meet popular people. Or volunteering at PAX. But for D&D, I think my favorite character was named Krones Pawmaster. He was a favored soul Asimar paladin, and he was a home campaign character. This is 4th edition again, because I played a lot of 4th edition. I recognized it was garbage. Everyone should hate it. But I played a lot of 4th edition because that was when I was starting.
I skipped it. Hipster.
Yeah, exactly. You were probably right to do so. But nonetheless, so and the reason I loved him so much is because I didn't really know what the campaign was going to be with him. He was billed to be like the hero, like the protagonist, the leader of the party. But he was younger, and he was raised in a monastery to be this like religious paladin, a bringer of the Church of the Lawgiver, like ultimate hope, but like the problems that still exist with very religious paladins, where there's a lot of black and white and not a lot of gray in the decisions and everything. And so he was specifically sent out with a knight to kind of not squire under, but apprentice under, and then he would go about his duties in the church as a paladin, dispensing the law, judge, jury, executioner, dread style,
as you paladin do,
as you do as a paladin, and then the knight he meets is a half dwarf, which didn't exist in 4th ed, but the person playing it had played plenty of Dark Sun and 3 and 3.5, and so half dwarf. There was more of a hedge knight. There was a much more like realistic hero. So he was kind of, the plot was that guy guiding my character, but I didn't really know what to do with him because I'm like, he seems like if he's so serious, that's just not what I do. So I gave him this voice, and then I basically got to write almost all the passages of the Book of the Lawgiver, which ended up being an incredibly pedantic book of things where it's like, and I recall the tale of the Goat Knight. Now, the Goat Knight was interesting because he ate the most bread of any knight of the Eastern Tunguska of the time. Why was he the Goat Knight? And I just made him this incredibly weirdly old man's, like a 19-year-old that tells story like an old man, where it just sort of wanders. And it was a real fun character to name, or to be and play. And I was super proud that his name came from the depalatizing machine of the Red Hook Brewery in Woodinville, Washington. It was called Crone's Paulmaster was its label. And I was like, that's my paladin's name, is Crone's Paulmaster. And I really loved it too, because I got to, when I came up with that voice, I didn't discuss it with the DM. It was a homebrew campaign, right? And so he was always from a country called the eastern side of Tunguska, next to a bordering country that was on kind of good terms with and everything. And so we'd been introduced to a regular Tunguskan from western Tunguska. But when we finally got to eastern Tunguska, suddenly the DM started being like an NPC would come up and is like, how fare you, young man? And I'm like, why are you talking like Crone's Spellmaster? And he's like, what, in an Eastern Tunguskan accent? So we made that entire region of the campaign, everyone talked like my character. It was so insane. Everyone had this voice and this cadence. And it's like, what are you talking about? I'm Crone's Paulmaster. Of course I can get this done. 100% of the language. And I was like, that is one of the greatest moments of weird improv, where you took That's this amazing. Thing I was doing for comedy. But I loved playing him. He was real fun. And he was probably my first big main D&D character that I spent a lot of time in. And so that's probably why I love him the most. Is because he was my first, right? Like, I got to spend time, and I got to approach it as a full adult, right? In my 20s comfortably, after I'd worked on other storytelling type things. So I didn't come to it like, it's like, oh, this person was just here to kill vampires. He had an arc, a plan, growth, flaws, and I was very happy to get to play that out for a long time.
Nice. So we're running out of time. So I gotta say, like, I'm really stoked. I just got into 5th edition. I know, like, I am sure I have 100 hot takes that like 100 people on the internet have written
give
better.
Them to me. Give me those 5th edition hot takes.
So like, I really am enjoying 5th edition. I'm joining it for a reason we'll talk about at the end. I was very reluctant, but I realized I was turning into that guy that I saw at the con that had a table that said 2nd edition or death when I was playing 3.5, and I was like, oh, look at that guy. I don't want to ever be that guy. And then I realized, oh man, I'm really being that way about 5th edition. I play tested it, and then I never really gave it a chance. I think as the premier role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons is synonymous with RPGs.
Yeah.
It is almost their responsibility to make it accessible. And they have made it accessible in such a way that it doesn't shun old fans like Fourth kind of did.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So there is some crunch there. There is some systems. There are some optional systems that make it even crunchier. But overall, I think they simplified it to the point that I'm really loving it. It looks like it's going to play fast. I like a lot of the system changes.
Fast, yeah.
I like the simplification of skills. I'm not a fan of no skill points. I'm not a fan of no prestige classes, but I'm starting to realize as I'm working through the material, like prestige classes have been replaced by things like fighting styles and bard schools.
Basically, they're like, no, from the beginning, automatically every class basically has its own version of prestige class.
And something somebody brought up to me that I thought was really cool was the idea that basically if you were going to play a prestige class 3-5 character, you were building for that prestige class from level 1.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do it efficiently. So the fact that these are now built into the classes,
yeah,
you were going to do that in 3-5 anyway. Sure, I missed the variety and some of the broken crunch.
Oh, yeah.
But like this, I was going to build a Shadow Dancer no matter what. Now I just am doing that
as part of the game. Yeah, it's by third level for most classes, you've picked your prestige class and are on that journey. And in 5th, it's so easy to multi-class at this point that you're like, oh, okay, I see. The crunch gets into if my long-term game, when I'm long-term planning, I'm like, okay, if I take 12 levels in this and then 3 levels in that and then another 5 levels in this, that means by like level 18 to 20, I'm doing these kinds of moves and these kinds of combinations and stacking all these low abilities that scale really well from these other 2 classes into the ceiling of what I need from this class. Yeah, kind of thing. And so that's, I think, what 5th really kind of leaned into was that. I remember you mentioning to me while you were reading it, you're like, I miss prestige classes. I'm like, it'll get there.
Exactly. And it's a lot of fun. And I really appreciate the rules for D&D 5th edition. I didn't even know this because I was so out of the scene on D&D. I was still stuck in 3.5 are free.
Yeah.
The base game is free.
It's completely, if you just want to test out D&D, they give you a pretty simplified version. It's got most of the
But it's like over 100 pages.
Yeah, it's got most of the player's handbook that you need. And a DM, and there's free adventures that they just released to either it or D&D, to Wizards or D&D Beyond specifically, that you can just have to get people by even like their first purchase product, which is like sort of like the handbook or like that stuff. It's like $20. It gives you 7 character sheets, a bunch of copies of like a shortened down player handbook pamphlet, and a GM guide and an adventure, and some dice for like $20. And you're like, there you go. If you want to play it physically, literally the least cost of entry you've ever seen in a D&D.
Oh, I mean, I'm super happy with the thing I just bought. I said like, okay, if I'm getting into 5th edition, I want the core books because I'm gonna run it eventually. And I found a deal where it's like $99. I got Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and GM screen in a limited edition slipcase thing, and the book covers are like shiny.
Yeah.
And it was all just one nice package for me to play, and I don't feel I need to buy anything else to play it, as opposed to 3.5, where I felt pressured to, at the very least, own all the complete books, or else you can't keep up with any of the prestige class stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to want to get Unearthed Arcana, and now Unearthed Arcana is just their word for stuff they're still
beta.
Playing around with, and you're welcome to try this out and report how it goes, and it will end up in a thing. So to wrap up, do you have anything like D&D wise going on like right now and possibly in the very near future?
For those that listen to this or watch this via Dying of Exposure, they've probably seen stuff called Through the Mill, which is my 5th edition campaign, homebrew Western fantasy setting, with the Posse, which is a 6-player campaign, and it's but it's an actual playthrough, but it's not like, it's performative to a degree, but it's mostly just what I would run a home campaign as.
Still fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a good group. I love my players. They've already made this more complicated than I ever planned it to be. But there's another thing that's more directly into why you suddenly bought a bunch of 5th edition stuff, Ron, and it's because I made you do it, because Dying of Exposure will be doing a performative podcast D&D series in the vein of Adventure Zone and not another D&D podcast and those types of podcasts. It doesn't have a name yet. We're going to be doing our session 0, or we'll have, by the time this recording comes out, we'll have done our session 0.
Yep.
And we'll be recording our kind of initial episodes. But yeah, so look out for that. It'll probably come out within the next couple months with its debut episode. And we'll be very excited, but it'll be edited. There'll be audio. There'll be Foley work. There'll be art for the characters and everything. It will be a little different than other Dying of Exposure content in the way that it will both be part of the Dying of Exposure website and everything like that. And then it'll be distributed in podcasts, but it will also have its own URL and its own domain and everything as part of, just for people that are just big podcast listeners that don't care about all the YouTube videos and Twitch stuff that we do other outside of that. They just are like, I like to listen to tabletop. So Ron will be one of the players. I will be the DM. The other 2 players are Kelsey, my partner, who, if people for some reason listen to this, and A Conversation to Candy about Dimension 20's actual play series, currently in its 5th season, that's the other player. And then I think he's only appeared on a couple videos on Dying of Exposure, but Aaron Blaylock, Shubzilla's partner, who Shubzilla you would know from the You About to Learn and 2 Yoke Bros if you pay attention to our nerdcore content stuff on Dying of Exposure. Her partner is the 3rd player, and there'll be 3 players and a DM, and there'll be guest people from different categories long term. But yeah, it'll be every 2 weeks, and it'll be fantastic.
I'm looking forward to it. And so this is a pro tip for people at home and maybe a surprise to you. But if you have a friend that does nothing but constantly run games, if you want to make a friend for life, run a game for that person. Surprise, you made a friend for life.
Yeah, I knew. I was thinking, okay, so this is going to be an honest moment, and we can close out on this, and I'm going to try and embarrass you here. So I was thinking, because I want this to be like a easy campaign for performative fun. Performative campaigns are different than regular D&D tabletop campaigns in the way that they have to move faster. There's less strategy discussion. They're usually less crunchy, which is why you going from 3.5 to 5th ed is almost perfect.
Yeah.
Spiritually, because it's like, it's faster, it's less crunchy, it can get more wild if you want. But performative campaigns are that, and I wanted it to be the people that I know are very capable role players that are also capable of taking big swings and being ridiculous, and that would be excited to do something that they could record for like a fairly long session and then be done, and then still have a lot of their time. And so when Kelsey expressed their interest, like literally the first person that I thought of when I was putting this together before Kelsey expressed their interest was, well, I got to get Ron as one of my players.
Oh.
Like, he's going to kill it. He knows how to role play in a way beyond just the tabletop as a LARPer and theater kid. He's going to be entertaining, and I know he's going to work well with any other person I bring into this campaign, because he's had to learn how to do that as a DM himself. He's had to learn how to bring people in. Every person, including once the one shot happens in this campaign, will have at least run one campaign in previous. They'll have at least had to be on the DM side once. And so I think that's it's going to be really fun to see all those people who oftentimes get corralled into DMing because they're willing to do it.
Hey, you own the books and like to tell stories.
Yeah. Play. That's where I'm always a fan. And I'm excited. I'm excited for this, but I'm very excited to be able to get to do another thing with you regularly beyond this podcast, and then one day board games sitting together, like not every part of our life has to be mutual content.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to film it. Doesn't have to be on a panel in front of...
The podcast will be nice that we don't have to film. I'm very excited.
It's interesting though, like now that I think of it, like how most of our relationship has evolved in front of other people. We met on a con panel.
Yep.
And then did other con panels together and ended up hanging out at a con while we were both like guests of honor and like kind of having to be on around people, but also like, this guy's cool, I want to kick it with him. Like, yeah, like, and then like doing me putting on conventions and you performing at them, you're in front of people, and then the podcast, like, man, I want a chance to kick it with Steve sometimes. I'm like, he'd be a great podcast host, but again, we're in front of people all the time.
Like one day, it's not a lot different. It's not a lot different. Like before the lights go on and the camera goes on,
it's pretty much this.
It's almost exactly the same. It's just there's less of a point. But yeah, so look forward to information on that. Obviously the roles we play, we'll share it out. Dying of Exposure, we'll share it out, and then that's going to be the most thirsty I've ever been in advertising, because like I need those Apple podcast reviews. I need that stuff for anyone to ever be able to hear it. And so it'll be uploaded to all the podcast networks, and then there'll be those same episodes will also be uploaded to YouTube. No video or anything. It will literally be like a character art thumbnail or a character art like still screen and just the audio. For those that follow Dying Exposure and they're just like, I don't listen to Spotify or iTunes or Apple Music or or anything like that. I don't listen to podcasts. And it's like, well, then you can put this on a tab on your browser and then do that. And of course it'll be on the websites. Anyway.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for watching. I had a good time talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Looking forward to the future with D&D 5th edition. The future, because it hasn't been out for years.
It's to where they're already beginning to talk. Are they gonna jump to 6th now? They're making a lot of money on 5.
Don't you dare.
Don't jump to 6. No, it's not going to jump to 6 for at least a few years. So you're safe for now.
Nice. Dying of Exposure on all the social media and the YouTube. The roles we play on the Facebooks, as well as Podbean, where we host everything for the downloadable podcast version and all that. Yeah.
The thing I used to put the audio into this video.
That's right.
I don't edit the audio anymore again, and I'm very excited not to.
Yeah, so this will be an easier format. It's nice to be in the same room, like you said, before they say we can't do this anymore. But you guys stay safe out there. I am Ron for Steve and the roles we play in Dying of Exposure. I'll play myself out.